Ever feel like keeping track of how India plays its cards with the big global players is, well, it's a puzzle, right? Constantly moving pieces.
There really is.
And you want the crucial insights, the stuff that really matters, but without, drowning in diplomatic jargon.
That's exactly the sweet spot we're aiming for today.
Yeah.
This deep dive is all about cracking open India's strategic playbook with the United States, France, and Russia.
Okay.
We've basically sifted through a whole load of recent analysis, looked at the historical context too, to really bring you the core of these, well, pretty complex relationships.
Exactly. So our mission, if you like, is simple. Give you a clear picture of India's balancing act with these global heavyweights. We'll try and uncover what's really driving these partnerships and, what they signal about India's place in the world. Maybe some surprises, hopefully some of those aha moments.
Hopefully. And I think to really get India's moves, we have to start with the core principle, the thing that guides its foreign policy. Strategic autonomy.
Strategic autonomy.
Right. Yeah. And this isn't some new idea they just cooked up. It's got deep roots, goes all the way back to India's history, specifically the non-aligned movement.
Right. I remember that. That was all about, steering clear of the big Cold War blocs, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, trying not to get caught in the middle.
Precisely. But, the world's a very different place now, isn't it?
Yeah, completely different ballgame.
It is. So while that spirit, that desire for independence definitely endures, India's approach has kind of evolved.
How so?
Well, instead of just not aligning, what we see now is a very active pursuit of partnerships. Specific partnerships.
Ah, okay. So it's more proactive now.
Exactly. It allows India to stay agile, stay flexible, and crucially, leverage the unique strengths that each different relationship offers.
So it's about keeping options open, a sort of strategic dance with multiple partners.
That's a good way to put it.
And each of these three, the U.S., France, Russia, they all bring unique benefits, but also, let's be honest, their own challenges, their own headaches.
Absolutely. No relationship is perfect.
Okay, so let's start with the United States.
Yeah.
That relationship seems to have changed dramatically.
Oh, dramatically is the word. The transformation, really, of India-U.S. relations since the Cold War.
Yeah.
It's nothing short of remarkable.
Yeah.
You go from a relationship that was often marked by distance and sometimes even, suspicion,
right,
to what we have now, which is a pretty significant strategic partnership really taking shape.
And this isn't just talk, is it? Diplomatic niceties. There are, real nuts and bolts here.
Definitely.
I think I saw three main pillars mentioned.
Right.
Defense cooperation, technology transfer, and this growing strategic alignment.
That's right. Those are the key areas.
Okay, let's unpack the first one, defense. That's got to be more than just buying and selling weapons.
Oh, absolutely. Way more.
Yeah.
So the U.S. has designated India as a major defense partner.
What does that mean, practically?
Think of it as like a fast-track status. It opens doors for deeper collaboration, makes things easier, and you see this playing out in the regular joint military exercises.
Like Yuddha Abhyas.
Exactly. Yuddha Abhyas for army drills, and then there's the Malabar naval exercises.
Yeah.
And Malabar is interesting because it now includes Japan and Australia, too.
Right, the Quad countries, basically. That sends a message.
It certainly does. And then you have these foundational agreements. They sound technical, but they're really important. LAMOA, COMCASA, and BECA. BECA was signed just in 2020.
Okay, break those down a bit. LAMOA.
LAMOA, Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement.
Yeah.
It basically allows our militaries to use each other's bases for logistical support, refueling, repairs. It significantly boosts operational reach, interoperability.
Gotcha. And COMCASA.
That one's about secure communications.
Right.
Making sure U.S. and Indian forces can talk to each other securely using encrypted systems. Vital for joint operations.
Makes sense. And BCA, the latest one.
Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement. This is the big one for enabling the sharing of sensitive geospatial intelligence.
Geospatial. So really detailed maps and satellite imagery.
Exactly. Precise mapping, location data. Hugely important for targeting, navigation, overall situational awareness in modern warfare. Sharing that kind of data, that requires a lot of trust.
Wow, yeah. That really signals a step up. Okay, so pillar 2, technology transfer. That sounds very future-focused.
Precisely. That's where initiatives like ICE come in.
ICE?
Yeah, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology was launched in 2023. It's all about pushing collaboration in these really cutting-edge areas. Think semiconductors, AI, space exploration.
Quantum computing.
That's in there too.
Right.
Plus, the next generation of mobile tech, like 5G and 6G. And this involves the U.S.-India Strategic Trade Dialogue as well, bringing together people from defense, business, academia.
It's a broad effort then.
Very broad. And what's really fascinating here, I think, is the U.S. actively courting India for semiconductor manufacturing.
The chips supply chain thing, diversifying away from China.
Exactly. It's a huge strategic pivot in global supply chain thinking, and it really underscores India's, well, its newfound leverage in this area. The U.S. sees India as a key partner there.
So the U.S. isn't just seeing India as a military partner, but as a crucial player in the future tech landscape, too.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to the third pillar, strategic alignment. And that seems, well, it seems largely driven by a shared concern, wouldn't you say?
I would, yeah. The increasing assertiveness of China, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, is a major point of convergence.
Both countries want stability there.
Both India and the U.S. have a very strong interest in upholding, a rules-based international order in that critical part of the world, and their cooperation within the Quad framework
with Japan and Australia
is a really clear demonstration of that shared goal.
Okay, so the U.S. relationship is deep, it's multi-layered, defense, tech, strategy, and this feels important, India's still calling its own shots, isn't it? It's a partnership, not India just following the U.S. lead.
Absolutely not. That's crucial to understand. India has very clearly demonstrated its strategic autonomy. It maintains independent stances on various global issues.
It's like Ukraine.
Like Ukraine, definitely.
Yeah.
But also its engagement with Iran, the situation in Gaza.
Yeah.
India takes its own view based on its own interests.
Right.
It really underscores the nature of the relationship. It's a strategic partnership, yes, built on significant shared interests, but each nation absolutely retains its own independent decision-making power.
Yeah.
It's not an alliance in the traditional sense.
Okay, that's a key distinction. Now, let's pivot. Let's turn to another really crucial partner, France. It feels like this relationship has maybe a different flavor, perhaps a longer history of trust, especially on defense.
That's a very insightful way to put it, actually.
Yeah.
France has definitely cultivated this reputation as a deeply trusted partner for India,
right,
particularly, as you say, in that strategically sensitive area of defense.
And the deals themselves, they kind of tell a story, don't they? The Rafale fighter jets, for instance, that wasn't just a simple purchase.
No, you're right. The Rafale deal became this powerful symbol, really, of the strategic trust between Paris and New Delhi.
And it's not just the Rafales, is it? There's talk of other things.
Oh, yeah. Beyond that headline deal, there are ongoing discussions, serious discussions about potential collaboration on submarines, co-production of jet engines.
Like the GEHAL deal we talked about with the U.S.?
Something potentially similar, yes. And even joint space missions. And a key aspect here is the focus on technology transfer programs. India is very keen to secure those.
And France has been willing.
Historically, yes. Yeah. Unlike some partners, France was willing to provide significant technology transfer for things like the Scorpene submarines, which was a major step for India's own indigenous shipbuilding capabilities. That shows a deeper level of trust.
And France also has, well, boots on the ground, so to speak, in the Indian Ocean region, doesn't it? Unlike the U.S., maybe.
Precisely. France's presence in the Indian Ocean through its territories like Reunion Island adds a really significant, tangible dimension to the partnership. It's not just abstract alignment.
So naval cooperation must be key.
Absolutely. Joint naval exercises like Varuna are crucial. They really help strengthen India's maritime capabilities. And back in 2018, they adopted this joint strategic vision of India-France cooperation in the Indian Ocean region.
Okay, so a formal strategy.
Yes, highlighting how important both countries see this. And we're also seeing more trilateral cooperation now involving France with partners like Australia or the UAE, focused on maritime security.
It sounds like France might be perhaps more willing to share some of its really top-tier technology without quite as many strings attached compared to, say, the U.S.
That's often perceived to be the case, yes.
Which must really align with India's big push for defense self-reliance, the whole Make in India initiative they launched back in 2014.
That's a key differentiator, exactly. France has, historically at least, offered high-end military tech with fewer conditions, fewer end-use monitoring constraints sometimes, compared to some other suppliers.
Making them attractive if you want to build your own stuff eventually.
Very attractive, yeah, especially for India's defense indigenization goals. And the numbers kind of back this up. Between 2019 and 2023, France was actually India's second largest arms supplier.
Second largest. After who? Russia.
After Russia, yes. But France accounted for a substantial 33% of India's arms imports during that period. That's significant.
Wow. So France isn't just a seller of equipment. They feel more like a genuine long-term strategic friend, especially maybe with the UK leaving the EU. France's role in Europe is even more central.
Exactly. France really stands out as a reliable, consistent partner. It offers both advanced military kit and a willingness to collaborate on technology development. That makes it a real cornerstone of India's efforts to achieve, well, that strategic autonomy we talked about.
Okay. US, France. Now, we absolutely cannot talk about India's key strategic partners without addressing, well, the bear in the room, Russia. Despite all the global shifts, the war in Ukraine, everything, Russia still plays a really significant role in India's strategic thinking, doesn't it?
It does indeed. Despite the really challenging geopolitical landscape right now, Russia remains absolutely crucial in India's strategic calculations. It's a relationship built on decades, literally decades, of close cooperation.
And when you talk about that history, I mean, the sheer amount of Russian-made or Soviet-era military gear in India's arsenal is staggering.
It really is. Estimates vary, but they generally suggest something like 60 to 70% of India's current military platforms are of Russian origin.
60 to 70% still.
Still. We're talking about everything from, the BrahMos missile, which is actually a really successful joint development story.
Right, India and Russia together.
To nuclear submarines like the INS Ariane, and of course the more recent high-profile S-400 air defense systems.
Which caused some friction with the U.S., didn't they?
They did, under CAATSA sanctions, yes. But India went ahead. And the mechanism for all this is the India-Russia Intergovernmental Commission on Military Technical Cooperation, the IRIGC-MTC. That handles procurement, servicing, joint R&D.
So a formal structure for decades.
Yes. Now, while Russia was India's largest arms supplier between 2019 and 2023, about 36%.
Okay, so still number one in that period.
Still number one, but it's really important to note that 36% is a significant drop.
From what?
From previous periods. It was like 76% between 2009 and 2013, then 58% between 2014 and 2018. So you see a clear trend.
Diversification, moving away slowly.
Exactly. India is clearly making efforts to diversify its sources, but that existing inventory, it needs maintaining, upgrading.
So Russia's still essential for keeping the current stuff running. But beyond military hardware, this partnership goes into other critical areas too, doesn't it? I'm thinking energy, space.
Absolutely. Russia has been a really key partner in India's civil nuclear energy program. The Kudankulam nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu is a prime example.
Right.
And space cooperation is another important dimension. Russia provided crucial support for India's Gaganyaan human spaceflight mission. There's also collaboration on making their satellite navigation systems. Russia's GLONASS and India's NEV work together. Interoperability.
Okay, interesting. And trade. I heard something about oil recently.
Yes, that's become huge. Russia actually became India's fourth largest trade partner in the last fiscal year, 2023-24. And that surge was largely, almost entirely, fueled by significant imports of discounted Russian crude oil since the Ukraine war started.
How significant?
We're talking over 35% of India's total crude oil imports coming from Russia now. It's massive.
Wow. So economic necessity plays a big role too, but underlying all this, it feels like there's this deep historical connection.
There is.
It's not just about deals. There's a sense of mutual trust, maybe, going way back to the Cold War, that 1971 treaty.
Exactly. The Treaty of Peace, Friendship, and Cooperation in 1971 was a landmark. And you're right, there's a long history. We're actually approaching the 78th anniversary of diplomatic ties in 2025.
78 years.
It highlights just how long this relationship has endured. It's often described as battle-tested. It's weathered various geopolitical storms over the decade.
But the current storm, it must be presenting some really big challenges now.
It absolutely is. Some very significant challenges.
Like the growing closeness between Russia and China. That's got to be awkward, maybe even worrying for India, given its own complex, often tense relationship with Beijing.
That's a primary concern, without a doubt. As Russia's alignment with China, India's main regional rival, strengthens, it introduces a new and, frankly, difficult dynamic for New Delhi to navigate.
And the war itself, Russia being preoccupied in Ukraine.
That's another major issue. It's led to potential delays, maybe even confirmed delays in some cases, in the delivery of crucial defense equipment. Things like the remaining S-400 systems, spare parts for existing kit.
Yeah, maintenance becomes a problem.
Exactly. And then there are the practical challenges from Western sanctions on Russia. Things like payment mechanisms. How do you actually pay for stuff when Russia's cut off from parts of the financial system?
Yeah.
They've had to work out complex rupee-ruble arrangements, which aren't always smooth.
Right. And India's stance on the war itself has been quite nuanced, muted criticism.
Very nuanced. India hasn't outright condemned Russia's invasion, abstaining on many UN votes. This reflects that delicate balancing act we keep going back to. India wants to preserve the relationship, needs the hardware and the oil, and crucially wants to avoid pushing Russia even further into China's embrace.
So India is really walking this incredible tightrope, isn't it? Maintaining these three distinct major relationships, US, France, Russia, that, sometimes must feel like they're pulling in completely opposite directions.
That's exactly.
It's this multi-alignment strategy we mentioned earlier, but really in action.
Precisely. India's strategy isn't non-alignment anymore. It's consciously, deliberately multi-alignment, strengthening ties with each of these powers, but for very specific reasons that directly serve its core national interests.
Okay, so let's break down that rationale again. With the U.S., it's primarily about
access to cutting-edge, critical technologies, and crucially, having a strong partner to help counterbalance China's growing influence, particularly in the Indo-Pacific.
Right, that convergence on Indo-Pacific security.
That's central to the U.S.-India partnership, yes.
And France. What's the core rationale there?
Defense autonomy is a big part of it. Getting reliable technology transfer, often with fewer strings attached, as we discussed, and bolstering maritime security in the Indian Ocean, where France has that direct presence.
So France helps with the Make in India goal and keeping the sea lanes safe.
You could say that, yes. France offers that level of trust and willingness to collaborate on developing India's own defense industry that is highly valued.
And finally, Russia. Despite all the current difficulties and the diversification push, why stick with them?
Well, first, ensuring continuity. Keeping that huge existing arsenal of Russian equipment operational requires ongoing supply of spares and support. That's essential.
Can't just ditch it overnight.
Absolutely not. And second, it's about maintaining that relationship, having that line of communication, precisely to avoid Russia becoming solely dependent on China, keeping options open.
So it gives India leverage, in a way. Prevents Russia being pushed entirely into Beijing's camp.
That's certainly part of the calculation. Maintaining a relationship with Russia, even with all the complexities, provides India with strategic depth and a wider range of options in this rapidly shifting global landscape.
It really does feel like that grand game of chess you mentioned earlier, a very calculated, constantly evolving set of moves. You push here, pull there.
Indeed. India's foreign policy isn't static. It's a dynamic, ongoing process. Carefully balancing these key relationships, leveraging the strengths of each partner, while actively trying to mitigate the potential risks and challenges that come with each one.
Looking ahead then, the world seems to be getting more polarized, not less. More blocs forming. India's ability to maintain this delicate balance, this multi-alignment, it's going to be seriously tested, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's probably the biggest question mark going forward. Several really key questions spring to mind, actually. Well, first, can India effectively safeguard that strategic autonomy, its ability to make independent decisions, while at the same time successfully securing its vital national interests, which often requires leaning on these partners?
That's the core tension right there.
It is. And related to that, can it skillfully avoid becoming overly reliant or perceived as overly reliant on any single major power in this increasingly complex, arguably more fractured geopolitical environment?
Can it keep all the balls in the air without dropping one or leaning too heavily on one hand?
Something like that, yes. These feel like the really defining questions that are going to shape India's role, its influence on the world stage, really throughout the 21st century.
Yeah.
They really are. Because India's strategic partnerships, they aren't just about the individual bilateral connections. They're fundamental to its whole vision of a more multipolar world order and, frankly, its own aspirations to be a leading global power.
So if we had to boil it all down for someone listening, the key takeaway is that India's strategic partnerships with the US, France, and Russia are this really intricate dance.
A complex dance.
Driven by that core principle, strategic autonomy, and the absolute necessity for India to skillfully navigate a multipolar world. A world facing some pretty significant challenges, not least, as we've seen, the rise of China.
Precisely. It demands constant vigilance, constant evaluation, adaptation, and a very clear-eyed understanding of its own national interests in a global landscape that, it just never stands still, does it?
No, it certainly doesn't. It really makes you think, though, something you touched on earlier, how this growing focus we're seeing across all of these partnerships, US, France, even Russia to some extent, on sharing technology, on developing things together, joint development. How might that actually change the nature of these relationships in the years to come?
That's a fascinating point.
Could it lead to, I don't know, new kinds of interdependence, new dependencies maybe? Or could it perhaps pave the way for India to become even more self-reliant in the long run, build up its own capabilities faster?
It could potentially go either way, couldn't it? Or perhaps a bit of both.
Yeah.
It adds another layer of complexity to that balancing act.
Definitely a fascinating thought to chew on after we finish here. Food for thought.